Beyond the impressive towers and thick stone walls, everyday life inside a medieval castle was far less comfortable than it might appear. A castle could seem like a place of safety and power, yet the same walls also surrounded residents with cold stone, limited light, crowded rooms, and constant noise. A resident might wake beneath a rough wool blanket, with only a narrow window allowing daylight inside. There was no central heating and no electric lighting. The castle was designed mainly for defense rather than comfort. Thick walls resisted attacks, but they also made rooms difficult to heat. Narrow windows offered protection but reduced natural light. Daily chores required carrying water, preparing food, cleaning floors, and maintaining fires by hand. For many residents, castle life meant working from morning until evening, then returning to another cold night. The grand appearance of a castle hid a simple truth. Living inside one involved many inconveniences. The first thing people might notice inside a medieval castle was cold. Thick stone walls were excellent for defense, but they were not good at keeping rooms warm. A small hearth could provide comfortable heat only to people sitting close to it, while the rest of a large chamber remained chilly. On a winter morning, leaving a warm wool blanket could be one of the least pleasant moments of the day. The stone floor beneath simple leather shoes could feel especially cold. Rushes, straw, rugs, and woven coverings offered only limited protection. Clothing also played an important role. Wool garments and layers of linen helped preserve body heat, yet staying warm required attention. Firewood had to be collected, carried, stored, and burned carefully. A fire that became too small could leave a room uncomfortable, while a poorly managed hearth could fill the chamber with smoke. Castle life was therefore a constant balance between warmth, fuel, smoke, and the cold stone surrounding everyone. Light was another everyday problem inside a medieval castle. Narrow windows helped to defend the building, but they also allowed limited daylight into many rooms. Thick walls, deep doorways, and small openings could make interior spaces feel dark even during the day. When the sun went down, things became more difficult. There were no electric lights to brighten a hallway or bedroom. People depended on candles, rushlights, oil lamps, and the glow of fireplaces. These sources gave off weak, uneven light and had to be watched carefully. A large hall might have several flames burning, yet shadows still gathered in corners and passages. Carrying a small lamp from one room to another was part of ordinary life. Limited light affected tasks such as reading, sewing, preparing food, or repairing clothing. For modern people accustomed to bright rooms, the darkness of a medieval castle would have felt especially noticeable. For its residents, dim evenings were simply part of the rhythm of life. Privacy was another luxury that medieval castle residents could rarely take for granted. A castle might contain many rooms, but people often lived and worked close together. Servants, guards, cooks, craftsmen, family members, and visitors could all share the same general spaces throughout the day. Sleeping arrangements varied according to status and wealth, but even private chambers were not necessarily isolated from household activity. Cloth curtains or simple wooden partitions could separate sleeping areas without creating complete privacy. In a busy castle, footsteps, conversations, doors, and household chores were part of the background noise. The Great Hall was especially important because it served many purposes: meals, meetings, work, entertainment, and social gatherings could all happen there. A person could rarely expect the silence that comes with a modern private bedroom. Even at night, servants or guards might move through nearby passages. Privacy was therefore less about having a completely separate space and more about finding a quiet corner when circumstances allowed. Water was another daily necessity that required real effort. A medieval castle did not have modern taps, showers, or indoor plumbing. Some castles had wells within their walls, while others relied on springs, cisterns, or water carried from nearby sources. When a well was available, someone still had to draw the water and transport it wherever it was needed. Wooden buckets could be heavy, especially when filled, and water was needed for cooking, washing, cleaning animals, and other household tasks. A single trip was rarely enough for an entire household. Servants and workers therefore spent considerable time carrying containers through courtyards and corridors. Washing practices were also very different from those of today. People could wash their hands and faces using basins and jugs, while larger washing required more preparation. Water had to be heated when warm washing was desired, and fuel was needed to heat it. Something as simple as having clean water nearby therefore involved labor, planning, and constant repetition. The convenience of turning a tap was completely unknown. Inside a medieval castle, even keeping the floors clean was a task. Stone floors collected mud, dust, straw, food scraps, and dirt carried in on shoes. In some rooms, fresh rushes or straw were spread across the floor to make it softer and cleaner. These coverings had to be gathered, replaced, and refreshed when they became worn or dirty. Servants handled this repetitive work using simple brooms made from natural materials. Cleaning was not a chore that could be finished with a machine, it required physical effort. Busy areas such as the Great Hall and kitchen became dirty quickly because people constantly walked through them, prepared meals, carried supplies, and handled firewood. Even wealthy residents could not escape these practical problems. The impressive appearance of a castle did not mean its interior was spotless. Maintaining a stone building required many hands, and ordinary cleaning was one of the endless responsibilities that kept daily life moving. The castle kitchen demanded constant work. Food had to be prepared without modern appliances, refrigerators, or packaged ingredients. Grain was ground, dough prepared, vegetables cleaned, and meat cooked over a hearth. Large iron pots hung above the fire while servants moved between tables and storage areas. Several fires could make the kitchen uncomfortable, especially during warm weather. Smoke was another problem. Openings and chimneys helped release it, but the air could still become unpleasant. Cooking required planning because food could spoil and some ingredients were seasonal. Salt, drying, and smoking helped preserve supplies. Bread was important and could be baked in large quantities. Behind every meal was physical work. Someone gathered fuel, prepared ingredients, tended the fire, cooked food, cleaned utensils, and stored what remained. For castle residents, the kitchen was not a place of convenience but a working space that remained active. Food storage was another challenge inside a medieval castle. Without refrigerators, fresh ingredients could not simply be kept for weeks. Castle households depended on careful storage and preservation. Grain was kept in sacks or wooden containers, while dried vegetables, salted meat, smoked fish, cheese, and other preserved foods could remain available for longer periods. Cool stone rooms were useful for keeping some supplies, but they were not perfectly controlled environments. Dampness, insects, rodents, and spoilage were constant concerns. Workers had to inspect stores regularly and protect valuable food from being wasted. Large households also needed considerable quantities of supplies, especially when many servants, guards, and residents lived inside the castle. Bringing those supplies into the castle required carts, animals, workers, and careful organization. A well-stocked pantry therefore represented much more than wealth. It showed that many people had worked to collect, transport, preserve, and protect the food. Even the impressive stone castle depended on a fragile chain of ordinary tasks. Clothing inside a medieval castle was practical rather than luxurious for most people. Wool was especially useful because it could provide warmth even in cold weather, while linen was commonly used for lighter layers worn closer to the body. A person might wear several layers depending on the season, but keeping those garments in good condition required regular work. Clothes were repaired instead of quickly replaced because producing new fabric took time and skill. A torn sleeve could be stitched, a worn edge reinforced, and an old garment altered for another use. Washing clothing was also difficult compared with modern life. Water had to be collected, carried, and used carefully, while suitable soap and cleaning materials were limited. Drying heavy wool garments could take time, especially during cold or rainy weather. Leather shoes also needed attention because rough roads, mud, and constant walking quickly caused wear. For castle residents, clothing was an important form of protection against the environment. Yet, even well made garments could not completely remove the discomfort of cold stone rooms, damp weather, and long working days. Medieval castle shoes were another source of discomfort. Most people wore simple leather footwear made for practical use rather than softness. Roads, courtyards, and stone floors could quickly damage them. Mud and rain made walking difficult, while uneven steps and rough paving required careful movement. A damaged shoe could not simply be replaced with a new pair. Leather had to be repaired or reshaped by a skilled craftsperson. Castle residents who spent much of the day walking, carrying supplies, or working outdoors could wear through footwear quickly. Wet leather could also become uncomfortable when there was no easy way to dry it. Inside the castle, cold stone floors added another problem. Even when shoes protected the feet from dirt and rough surfaces, they did little to make the ground feel warm. These difficulties remind us that medieval comfort depended on constant maintenance. Walking through the castle could involve cold floors, uneven steps, mud, and worn footwear. The castle stairs could also make ordinary movement surprisingly tiring. Many medieval castles had narrow stone stairways designed around the needs of defense rather than comfort. Steps could be uneven, steep, and worn from years of use. In a busy fortress, people climbed them repeatedly while carrying food, water, firewood, clothing, or other supplies. A servant moving between floors might make the same journey many times during a single day. Spiral staircases were especially practical because they saved space inside thick walls, but they offered little room for two people to pass comfortably. Small openings provided limited daylight, so movement could become more difficult after sunset. There were no modern handrails or bright electric lights to make every step easy to see. People simply learned the familiar routes and moved carefully. For a visitor, the stairs might seem fascinating and historic. For someone who used them every day, they were simply another physical part of castle life. The impressive towers came with plenty of climbing, carrying, and repeated effort. The castle walls offered protection, but they also created another problem: poor ventilation. Thick masonry kept rooms enclosed, while small windows limited fresh air. Kitchens, hearths, lamps, and crowded halls could make the air smoky or stale. Smoke from a fire might rise toward the roof and escape through openings. But the process was not always perfect. In a busy room, the smell of cooking, damp clothing, animals, and many people could remain for hours. Castle residents became accustomed to these conditions because there were few alternatives. Opening a window was not always practical during cold weather, and large openings could weaken the defensive design. Even bedrooms could feel stuffy after many people had spent the night inside. The castle was built to be secure and durable, not to provide the fresh, carefully controlled indoor air that modern homes provide. For residents, managing smoke and unpleasant air was another ordinary part of daily life. Noise was another part of castle life that modern people might find difficult. A large castle was rarely completely silent. Wooden doors opened and closed, footsteps crossed, stone floors, servants carried supplies, cooks worked near the hearth, and guards moved through corridors. The great hall could become especially lively during meals or gatherings. Even at night, a castle remained active. Watchmen walked along passages and battlements, servants could move between rooms, and animals might make sounds in nearby areas. Thick stone walls could reduce some sounds, but they could also make footsteps echo through narrow corridors. A person trying to rest might still hear movement outside the chamber. Privacy and silence were therefore limited luxuries. People simply became familiar with the normal sounds of the household. The castle's impressive appearance often suggests peaceful grandeur, but daily life was filled with ordinary activity. From morning until late at night, the building was a working environment where many people lived close together and complete quiet was difficult to find. The Great Hall was often the heart of castle life. It could serve as a dining room, meeting place, workplace, and social space all at once. Long wooden tables and benches filled the room while servants moved around carrying food, drinks, firewood, and household supplies. During meals, many people could be present at the same time. The hall might also host visitors, discussions, celebrations, or routine work. This made it useful, but not especially private. A person could rarely expect the quiet separation found in a modern home. The floor might be covered with rushes while smoke from the hearth slowly rose toward the roof. Wooden beams, stone walls, and small windows gave the room its familiar medieval appearance. For important residents, the Great Hall could represent status and authority, yet it remained a busy working space. Meals required preparation, tables needed cleaning, and fires needed tending. The hall was impressive, but its daily reality was practical, crowded, and often noisy. Even meals themselves could be less comfortable than modern dining. Food was commonly served in simple wooden or clay vessels, and people used spoons, knives, or their hands depending on the food and social setting. Bread was an important part of the meal and could sometimes serve as a base for other foods. Porridge, vegetables, beans, meat, fish, and dairy products varied according to location, season, wealth, and availability. There were no supermarkets supplying fresh ingredients every day, so food had to be grown, purchased, hunted, gathered, preserved, and stored. Salt was valuable for preservation, while drying and smoking helped keep certain foods usable for longer. A large household required a great deal of organization to provide regular meals. Servants had to prepare ingredients, maintain fires, serve food, clear tables, and clean afterward. Even a simple evening meal represented hours of preparation. For the people eating, it might seem ordinary, but behind it stood a large amount of labor that modern conveniences have largely hidden from view. Heating the castle was a constant responsibility. Firewood had to be gathered, cut, carried, and stored before it could warm a room. A large stone building could consume enormous amounts of fuel, especially during a cold season. The hearth was therefore valuable, but its warmth was limited. People sitting close to the fire could feel comfortable, while someone only a short distance away might still feel cold. Thick walls absorbed heat and made warming large chambers difficult. Fires also required attention because burning wood could produce smoke, sparks, and dangerous flames. Someone needed to add fuel and keep the hearth under control. At night, fires might be reduced for safety, leaving rooms colder until morning. Residents used wool clothing, blankets, curtains, and rugs to help retain warmth. Yet none of these methods could make a medieval castle feel like a modern heated home. Staying warm required planning and physical effort every day, and the comfort of a fire depended heavily on how much fuel the household could obtain. Rainy weather could make castle life even less comfortable. Water collected in courtyards and turned dirt paths into mud, while wet clothing needed time to dry. People traveling between buildings could carry moisture inside on their shoes and garments. Castle walls protected residents from some of the weather, but open courtyards, towers, battlements, and exposed passages were still affected by rain and wind. Roofs and drainage systems helped move water away, yet maintaining them required regular work. A damaged roof could allow water into rooms, while blocked drainage could create puddles near important areas. Servants had to deal with these practical problems as part of their routine duties. During long periods of rain, drying firewood could also become difficult, making the problem of heating even worse. Modern homes separate people from weather with sealed windows, waterproof clothing, heating, and drainage. Medieval castles had none of these conveniences in their modern form. Residents simply adapted to wet floors, damp garments, muddy courtyards, and the constant need to repair and maintain the building. Castle maintenance never really ended. A medieval fortress was a structure made from stone, timber, plaster, metal, and every part needed attention. Wooden doors could warp, roof tiles could break, walls could develop cracks, and drainage channels could become blocked. Floors became worn from constant footsteps, while hinges, locks, tools, and furniture needed repair. Skilled craftsmen were important to castle life. Carpenters worked with timber, masons repaired stonework, blacksmiths maintained metal objects, and other workers handled textiles or leather. Even residents contributed by cleaning, carrying supplies, and reporting problems. A castle could look permanent, but it required constant care. Without regular maintenance, rain, dampness, fire, and everyday use could slowly damage it. The walls that represented security also created an enormous workload. Living in a castle meant not only using the building, but continually helping to keep it standing. Another difficulty was the constant need to manage waste. Medieval castles had systems for removing household waste, but they were far from the convenient sanitation modern homes provide. Food scraps, ash, broken pottery, and other refuse had to be collected and taken away from living areas. Privies or latrines were usually positioned with practical concerns in mind, sometimes using openings or channels that carried waste outside the main living spaces. Keeping these areas usable required cleaning and maintenance. Castle residents also lived around animals, especially horses and other working creatures, which created additional dirt and smells. Courtyards could become muddy and unpleasant when waste mixed with rainwater. People learned to accept smells and conditions that would seem difficult today. The important point is that a castle was not a perfectly clean stone palace. It was a busy working environment where food, people, animals, smoke, and waste all existed close together. Keeping such a place reasonably usable required regular labor from many people every single day. Animals were an important part of castle life and added another layer of work. Horses were needed for travel, transport, farming, and military duties, while other animals could provide food or help with daily tasks. Stables, therefore, had to be maintained, cleaned, and supplied with fresh bedding and feed. The smell of animals could drift toward other parts of the castle, especially when the weather kept doors and windows closed. Workers carried water, hay, grain, and other supplies, often making repeated trips throughout the day. Horses also required grooming and care, while sick or injured animals needed attention. Keeping animals inside or close to a fortified settlement was practical, but it meant that people lived with noise, dirt, and smells that modern homes carefully keep outside. For castle residents, these conditions were ordinary. The sound of hooves, the movement of carts, and the work around the stables were simply part of the daily rhythm. A medieval castle was not an isolated palace. It was a working community where people and animals depended on each other. The castle courtyard was one of the busiest places in the entire settlement. People crossed it carrying water, food, firewood, tools, clothing, and other supplies. Carts came and went, animals were led between buildings, and workers completed routine chores. The courtyard connected different parts of the castle, so movement was almost constant. During dry weather, dust could cover the ground while rain could turn it muddy. Uneven stones made walking slower, especially for anyone carrying a heavy load. The courtyard also had to serve practical purposes such as storage, work, and sometimes small-scale food preparation. Wooden barrels, baskets, carts, and bundles of materials could occupy valuable space. For residents, this was not a quiet garden but a working area. Even people with important positions could not completely escape the activity around them. The courtyard showed the real character of castle life. Impressive walls surrounded a place filled with ordinary labor. Every day, hundreds of small movements helped keep the household supplied and functioning. The castle pantry needed careful organization because food was valuable and supplies could not be replaced instantly. Grain, flour, dried beans, salted meat, cheese, herbs, and other provisions were stored in different containers and rooms. Workers had to know what was available and what needed to be used first. Damp conditions could ruin food, while insects and rodents could damage grain and other supplies. Barrels and jars therefore had to be checked regularly. Large households also needed to prepare for periods when fresh food was difficult to obtain. Seasonal changes affected what could be grown, purchased, or preserved. A well-managed pantry helped the castle survive these changes, but keeping it organized required constant effort. People had to carry heavy sacks, move barrels, clean storage areas, and inspect supplies. Modern kitchens hide much of this work behind refrigeration and convenient packaging. In a medieval castle, food storage was a daily responsibility. The impressive household depended on careful planning long before a meal ever reached the table. Sleeping in a medieval castle was not always the peaceful experience we imagine. Beds varied greatly, depending on wealth and status, but even comfortable beds were usually made from wooden frames, linen sheets, wool blankets, and stuffed mattresses. The stone walls around them could remain cold through the night. In shared rooms, other people might sleep nearby, making complete privacy difficult. Curtains could provide some separation, but they did not block every sound or movement. A person might hear footsteps in the corridor, voices from another room, or the quiet work of servants and guards. Small windows also allowed cold air to enter, especially during winter. Keeping warm meant using thick blankets, wool clothing, and whatever warmth remained from a nearby hearth. Bedbugs and other household pests were also possible problems in medieval living spaces. For many residents, sleep simply meant resting after a long day of physical work. The bed offered relief, but it could not remove the cold, noise, limited privacy, and other inconveniences of castle life. Even nighttime had its own practical difficulties. Beds inside castles also changed with social status. Wealthier residents might have larger wooden beds with curtains, mattresses, and better quality blankets, while servants and workers often used much simpler sleeping arrangements. A curtained bed could provide some privacy and help keep out drafts, but it was still surrounded by cold stone and the sounds of a busy household. Mattresses were often filled with materials such as straw, wool, or other available fibers, which could become flattened and uncomfortable over time. Bedding needed to be aired, repaired, and cleaned whenever possible. In a large household, Several people might sleep in the same chamber, especially servants. This meant that bedtime did not always bring complete silence. Someone could arrive late, wake early, or move around during the night. The idea of a quiet private bedroom with a soft mattress and controlled temperature would have been unfamiliar. Even the best sleeping space in a medieval castle was shaped by the materials, technology, and practical limits of the period. Comfort existed, but it was relative to the world around it. Castle life also depended heavily on servants and workers whose routines began early and ended late. Before many residents were awake, fires might need attention, water had to be collected, animals required care, and food preparation had to begin. During the day, servants carried supplies, cleaned rooms, prepared meals, repaired clothing, and assisted important household members. Their work connected almost every part of castle life. A noble household could appear comfortable because other people performed the difficult tasks behind the scenes. Yet even the wealthy depended on the same physical realities. Water still had to be carried, wood still had to burn, food still had to be stored, and rooms still needed cleaning. The castle functioned because many workers repeated these chores every day. Their labor was often ordinary and largely unnoticed, but without it, the household would quickly become uncomfortable. When we imagine medieval castles today, it is easy to focus on nobles, knights, and grand halls. In reality, daily life depended just as much on the people carrying buckets, sweeping floors, tending fires, preparing food, and keeping the building running. Work inside a medieval castle was closely connected to the changing seasons. Winter brought cold rooms, shorter daylight, and greater demand for firewood. Summer offered more daylight but could make kitchens and crowded halls hot and uncomfortable. Spring and autumn brought rain, mud, and changing temperatures that affected travel and food supplies. The household had to prepare ahead of time because many resources were seasonal. Firewood needed to be collected and stored before winter. Food had to be preserved when harvests were available, while clothing and buildings needed repairs before bad weather arrived. These preparations required planning and labor from many people. A castle could not simply rely on convenient deliveries whenever something ran out. Its residents depended on nearby farms, craftsmen, merchants, and stored supplies. Seasonal changes therefore shaped everyday routines. The castle might look permanent and unchanging, but life inside followed the natural cycle of weather, daylight, harvest, and fuel. Comfort depended on how well the household prepared for each new season. Winter was probably the season when the castle felt least comfortable. Daylight disappeared early, temperatures dropped, and keeping warm required more fuel. Firewood had to be carried from storage to the hearth, sometimes several times a day. Thick stone walls held the cold for long periods, so a fire could warm only a limited part of a room. Residents wore wool layers and used blankets, curtains, and rugs to reduce drafts. Even then, corners of large chambers could remain cold. Outdoor work was also harder. Carrying water, feeding animals, collecting supplies, and checking the castle walls became unpleasant in freezing weather. Snow and ice could make stairs and courtyards dangerous, while heavy rain could damage roofs and pathways. Inside, shorter daylight meant greater dependence on candles and lamps, which consumed valuable fuel or materials. The castle provided shelter from the worst weather, but shelter did not mean warmth. For many residents, winter was a long period of managing cold, darkness, fuel, clothing, and endless practical chores. Summer brought different problems to medieval castle life. Longer daylight made work easier to organize, but thick stone rooms could still become warm and uncomfortable. Kitchens were especially hot because of the constant use of hearths and ovens. Food also spoiled more quickly in warm conditions, so storage and preservation became even more important. Courtyards could become dusty when the weather was dry, while flies and other insects were more noticeable around food, animals, and waste. Residents spent more time outdoors when conditions allowed, but outdoor spaces offered little relief during the hottest part of the day. Clothing had to balance protection and heat, and heavy wool garments could feel uncomfortable. Even simple tasks such as carrying water or moving supplies became tiring under strong sunlight. The castle's thick walls helped protect against some extremes, but they could not eliminate seasonal discomfort. Summer therefore replaced the winter problems of cold and darkness with heat, insects, spoiled food, dust, and the constant work of keeping the household clean and supplied. Rain could affect nearly every part of castle life. A wet courtyard became muddy, making it harder to move carts, animals, and heavy supplies. People entering buildings carried mud on their shoes, increasing the work of servants who cleaned floors and replaced dirty rushes. Wet clothing also needed to be dried, and heavy wool could remain damp for a long time. Firewood was another concern because damp fuel was harder to burn and could produce more smoke. Roofs and gutters required attention as well. A small leak might become a larger problem if it was ignored, especially in rooms used to store food or valuable goods. Workers had to inspect roofs, clear drainage channels, and protect important supplies from water. Rain was therefore more than an inconvenience. It could affect transportation, heating, clothing, cleanliness, and building maintenance all at once. Modern houses separate us from most of these problems, but medieval residents experienced them directly. A rainy day inside a castle could turn many ordinary tasks into slower, wetter, and more difficult work. After months of rain, mud could become one of the most familiar features of castle life. Courtyards, roads, and paths were often made from packed earth, gravel, or uneven stone rather than smooth modern surfaces. Heavy foot traffic quickly disturbed the ground, especially around gates, wells, stables, and storage areas. People carrying supplies had to move carefully to avoid slipping or dropping their loads. Animals made the situation worse by churning the ground with their hooves. Servants could spend part of the day cleaning mud from entrances and floors. Shoes and clothing became dirty quickly, and wet garments needed to dry before they could be comfortably worn again. Mud also affected carts, making the transport of food, firewood, and other supplies more difficult. The castle walls might remain impressive and solid, but the ground around them could be messy and inconvenient. For residents, dealing with mud was simply another small part of maintaining a working household. Life inside the castle was shaped by practical problems that had to be handled repeatedly. Once the first 30 minutes of the story have passed, the castle can begin to feel less like a grand palace and more like a busy medieval workplace. Its towers, walls, and halls were impressive, but nearly every part of the building demanded effort. Water had to be carried, fires maintained, food stored, clothing repaired, floors cleaned, and animals cared for. Even simple movement through the castle could involve narrow stairs, uneven stones, and crowded passages. Residents depended on servants, craftsmen, farmers, and merchants to keep supplies moving. The castle's strength came from organization as much as from stone. Without people constantly working, the household could not function for long. This is one reason the romantic image of castle life can be misleading. A castle could represent wealth and power while still offering limited privacy, weak lighting, uncomfortable temperatures, and difficult sanitation. For ordinary residents, these conditions were not unusual. They were simply part of the world they understood. The impressive exterior hid a daily routine built around work, maintenance, and survival. Castle doors were built for strength, not convenience. Heavy wooden doors could be difficult to open, especially when reinforced with iron fittings. Some entrances needed several people to move or secure them properly. Smaller interior doors were easier to manage, but they still had simple latches, bars, or locks that required care. At night, important entrances had to be secured, and guards could be responsible for checking them. Moving supplies through narrow doorways could also become awkward. A person carrying a basket, bucket, or bundle of firewood had to work around heavy doors and busy passages. Drafts were another problem. When a door opened during cold weather, outside air could quickly enter a room. Thick curtains or additional wooden barriers could reduce some of the cold, but they could not stop every draft. Modern doors are designed for easy movement, insulation, and security at the same time. Medieval castle doors placed security first. Their great strength protected the household, but everyday movement through them could be slow, heavy, and inconvenient. Castle windows reveal another difference between medieval life and modern homes. Many openings were narrow because thick walls and defensive needs were important. Some windows had shutters, wooden coverings, or simple glass in wealthier areas, but large bright windows were uncommon in defensive parts of a fortress. During the day, limited sunlight could make rooms dim, especially when the weather was cloudy. At night, shutters helped protect the interior from wind and cold, but they also blocked whatever natural light remained. Sitting beside a window might provide a pleasant view of the countryside, yet the opening itself could still allow drafts into the room. Workers sometimes had to clean or maintain shutters and window fittings, while damaged openings required repair. The modern expectation of large sealed windows that provide light, ventilation, and insulation would have been unfamiliar. A castle window was mainly shaped by the needs and materials of its time. It offered a connection to the outside world, but it also reminded residents that defense and practicality came before comfort. The castle walls also affected how people moved around the building. A fortress could contain towers, halls, kitchens, storage rooms, workshops, courtyards, and private chambers, often connected by narrow passages and stairs. A task that seems simple today could require a long walk through several parts of the complex. Carrying water from a well to a kitchen, moving firewood to a hearth, or taking food from a storage room to the Great Hall all required physical effort. Servants learned the routes through daily repetition, but visitors could easily become confused. Thick walls and enclosed passages could make some areas dark, while different levels created additional stairs to climb. The castle's design was practical for defense and organization, but it was not planned around quick movement or accessibility. Residents adapted because they had no alternative. They carried loads by hand, climbed stairs repeatedly, and became familiar with every corner of the building. The Grand Castle therefore demanded constant movement from the people who kept it functioning, turning ordinary chores into surprisingly physical work. The castle courtyard also had to accommodate animals, deliveries, and everyday work. Horses arrived with riders, carts brought supplies, and workers moved between the stables, kitchens, workshops, and storage buildings. This activity could make the courtyard noisy and crowded. A person carrying a bucket might need to step aside for a cart, while someone leading a horse had to navigate around other workers. During wet weather, the ground became muddy, and during dry weather, dust could rise from constant movement. The courtyard was therefore a practical space rather than a peaceful garden. Its layout reflected the needs of a working community. Wells, ovens, storage areas, workshops, and entrances were positioned to support daily tasks. People who lived there became used to the sounds and smells of ordinary activity. From a modern perspective, the lack of separation between work, animals, storage, and living spaces might seem uncomfortable. For medieval residents, however, these arrangements were familiar. The castle functioned because every part of the courtyard had a purpose, even when that purpose made daily life busy and messy. The castle chapel could offer a quieter place, but it was not necessarily warm or comfortable. Many chapels were built with thick stone walls and narrow windows. Just like other parts of the fortress, wooden benches or simple seats provided little softness, and winter mornings could feel especially cold. Religious services and prayers were part of daily life for many medieval people, so residents might enter the chapel at regular times. Candles provided some light, while simple decorations or painted images added color to otherwise plain stone surfaces. The chapel was not designed like a modern, comfortable room. Its purpose was spiritual rather than luxurious. Even so, it could provide a moment away from the noise of kitchens, courtyards, workshops, and crowded halls. For someone tired after a long day, a quiet chapel might have felt peaceful despite the hard benches and cold walls. The contrast is important. Medieval comfort often meant finding a small improvement within difficult surroundings rather than expecting the entire environment to be comfortable. Castles also had to protect valuable supplies from fire. Open flames were essential for cooking, heating, and lighting, yet fire could become dangerous when used around timber, straw, cloth, and stored materials. Kitchens were especially important because large hearths burned regularly. Workers needed to manage flames carefully and keep combustible items away from the hottest areas. Candles and lamps created additional risks in bedrooms, corridors, and halls. A careless flame could damage property or spread quickly through wooden structures. Medieval castles used stone extensively, which helped create fire-resistant areas, but roofs, floors, doors, furniture, and beams could still burn. Water was available in some places, yet fighting a large fire remained difficult. Residents therefore had to balance the need for warmth and light with constant awareness of danger. The hearth that made a cold chamber bearable could also threaten the entire household if something went wrong. Modern buildings use electrical systems, alarms, extinguishers, and carefully designed safety measures. Medieval residents relied mainly on experience, caution, and constant attention. Castle storage areas could be dark, crowded, and difficult to organize. Supplies were often kept in rooms beneath halls, inside towers, or in other protected spaces. Grain, barrels, tools, clothing, and household equipment all needed places where they could remain reasonably safe. Heavy items had to be moved carefully, especially when stairways were narrow. A worker carrying a sack could struggle to see clearly if the room had only a small window or a single lamp. Storage also required protection from moisture. Damp stone could damage wood, cloth, and food, so workers had to choose suitable locations and check supplies regularly. Some goods were kept in barrels, chests, baskets, or clay containers, depending on what they contained. Organization mattered because a large household could consume supplies quickly. If an important item was misplaced, finding it might require searching several rooms. There were no digital inventories or convenient labels. People relied on memory, experience, and simple records. The castle stores therefore required constant attention, just like every other part of the household. Maintaining clothing was another quiet but important part of castle life. Fabric was valuable because making it required growing or obtaining fibers, spinning thread, weaving cloth, and sewing garments by hand. When clothing became worn, people usually repaired it instead of throwing it away. A small tear could be stitched, while larger damage might require patch. Wool garments could be reshaped or reused when they were no longer suitable for their original owner. Laundry also required effort. Water had to be collected, and washing involved soaking, rubbing, rinsing, and drying garments without modern machines. Heavy wool was particularly difficult to clean and dry. Clothing could also absorb smoke from fires and odors from crowded living spaces. For people spending long days near hearths, animals, and workshops, keeping garments fresh was challenging, yet good clothing was essential for warmth and protection. Every cloak, tunic, shirt, and pair of shoes represented valuable work. The resident of a medieval castle therefore learned to care for clothing carefully because replacing it was neither quick nor simple. The final hours of the day brought a slower rhythm to the castle, but work did not stop completely. Fires needed to be checked, doors secured, animals settled, and important supplies protected. Servants finished cleaning the great hall and kitchen while guards prepared for the night watch. Lamps and candles were lit in selected rooms, creating small pools of warm light against a dark stone. People gathered near the hearth when possible, enjoying the limited warmth after a long day. Others prepared their beds or completed quiet tasks, such as repairing clothing. The castle gradually became darker and quieter, although footsteps could still be heard in nearby passages. Outside, the battlements faced the night sky while watchmen remained alert. For residents, nighttime was not simply a period of complete rest. The household still needed protection and maintenance. Yet, compared with the busy hours of daylight, the evening could provide a welcome sense of calm. After all the carrying, cleaning, cooking, repairing, and organizing, the castle slowly settled into silence. Night inside a medieval castle was never completely dark or completely silent. A few candles or lamps might remain burning in important areas, while the hearth provided a faint glow in occupied rooms. Guards continued their rounds, listening for unusual sounds beyond the walls. Servants might still move quietly through corridors if work required it. For someone resting in a chamber, distant footsteps could occasionally break the silence. Wind passing through narrow openings could make soft sounds against wooden shutters and stone walls. In winter, the cold became more noticeable once the fires were reduced. Thick blankets and wool clothing offered some protection, but the room could still feel chilly. A person might sleep beneath several layers while keeping the body close to whatever warmth remained. Modern bedrooms are designed to control temperature, light, and noise, but medieval chambers offered little such control. The night was simply another environment to adapt to. After a long day of work, residents rested as comfortably as their bedding, clothing, and surroundings allowed. Morning returned slowly to the medieval castle. Before many residents began their work, servants were already tending fires and preparing the household for another day. Water needed to be collected, food prepared, animals checked, and rooms opened for activity. The first light entered through narrow windows, revealing stone walls, wooden beams, and the remains of the previous evening's fire. A person waking in the castle did not simply get ready and walk into a modern kitchen. Almost every part of the morning depended on someone completing a practical task. Clothes had to be found, footwear prepared, and warmth maintained. The great hall gradually filled with movement as workers carried supplies and residents gathered for breakfast. Outside, the courtyard became active with carts, animals, and people beginning their duties. The castle looked peaceful from a distance, but inside, another day of work was already underway. This daily rhythm repeated again and again, showing that castle life depended less on luxury than on organization, labor, and constant preparation. The morning meal in a medieval castle was usually practical and filling rather than elaborate. Bread was an important food, sometimes served with cheese, vegetables, porridge, eggs, fish, or meat depending on wealth and availability. A warm drink or simple ale might accompany the meal. Before anyone could eat, however, servants had already spent time preparing the food and tending the fire. Grain needed grinding, ingredients had to be brought from storage, and cooking vessels needed to be cleaned afterward. Large households consumed considerable quantities of food, so the kitchen remained busy throughout the day. Meals also followed social customs. Important residents could receive better portions or more varied dishes, while servants and workers had simpler food. Even when the table looked generous, the meal represented a large amount of hidden labor. Someone had grown or obtained the ingredients, preserved them, carried them into the castle, prepared them, cooked them, served them, and cleaned afterward. Eating was easy compared with everything required to make the meal possible. The castle blacksmith had an important role in keeping everyday life working. Metal objects were needed for doors, hinges, locks, tools, cooking equipment, and many other practical tasks. A blacksmith worked near a hot forge, shaping heated metal with hammers and simple tools. The work was physically demanding and required skill, patience, and attention. Sparks could fly from the forge, while smoke and heat made the workshop uncomfortable. Tools could break or wear out, so repairs were often necessary. A damaged hinge might prevent a heavy door from working properly, while a broken cooking tool could affect the kitchen. Even small metal parts were important because the castle depended on hundreds of ordinary objects. The blacksmith, therefore, supported many different areas of daily life. From the great hall to the kitchen and stable, metalwork helped keep the household functioning. The castle's strength came from stone walls, but its daily operation also depended on craftsmen quietly repairing the tools and fittings that everyone used. The carpenter was another essential worker inside and around the castle. Wood was needed for doors, tables, benches, beds, chests, carts, tools, roofs, and countless smaller objects. A skilled carpenter could repair damaged furniture or create new pieces when something wore out. Timber had to be measured, cut, shaped, joined, and sometimes reinforced with metal fittings. The work produced wood shavings and required a suitable workspace, often close to the courtyard or workshops. Unlike modern furniture, medieval wooden objects were made individually and could take considerable time to produce. A broken chair could not simply be replaced from a nearby store. Someone had to repair it by hand. Large repairs were even more demanding. Roof beams, doors, bridges, and wooden structures all needed strong and carefully prepared timber. The carpenter's work, therefore, connected comfort with survival. A bed needed wood, a door needed wood, and storage chests protected valuable belongings. Much of castle life depended on ordinary wooden objects that required constant care. The mason's work was just as important as the carpenter's. Medieval castles depended on stone walls, towers, stairways, floors, fireplaces, and foundations. Building and repairing these structures required heavy physical labor. Stones had to be cut, shaped, moved, and placed carefully, often using simple tools and lifting equipment. Mortar was prepared by hand, and workers spent long hours exposed to weather while repairing damaged sections. A castle wall might look permanent, but rain, frost, movement, and everyday use could gradually weaken parts of it. Small cracks needed attention before they became serious problems. Masons also repaired fireplaces, doorways, and other stone features inside the castle. Their work was slow because every piece had to fit correctly. Modern construction uses machines and standardized materials. But medieval builders depended mainly on human skill and organized labor. The impressive towers that survive today were created and maintained through countless hours of physical work. For people living inside the castle, stone was not simply decoration, it was the material that provided protection, shelter, and endless. Castle life also depended on nearby farms and villages. A fortress could not produce everything it needed inside its walls. Grain, vegetables, livestock, firewood, cloth, and other supplies often came from surrounding lands. Farmers worked outside the castle while merchants and carts transported goods towards the gates. During harvest seasons, the movement of food could become especially important. Workers inside the castle then had to unload, inspect, store, and organize these supplies. This connection meant that the castle was part of a larger community rather than an isolated world. A grand fortress might dominate the landscape, but its residents depended on the labor of people living beyond the walls. Bad harvest, poor weather, or disrupted roads could affect the amount of food available. Maintaining a secure supply therefore required planning and cooperation. From the perspective of someone living inside the castle, a simple loaf of bread represented work that had started far away in a field. Castle comfort depended on an entire network of people, animals, land, and transportation. Traveling to and from a medieval castle was another source of discomfort. Roads were often rough, muddy, or uneven, and journeys depended heavily on weather. A person traveling by horse could still experience long hours of movement, while those walking carried their own supplies or relied on pack animals. Carts were useful for transporting heavy goods, but wheels could become stuck in mud or damaged on difficult roads. Bridges and river crossings also affected travel. A journey that looks short on a modern map could take much longer when roads were poor and transportation was slow. Visitors arriving at a castle therefore did not simply step out of a comfortable vehicle at the gate. They might arrive tired, dirty, wet, and covered in road dust. Supplies also reached the castle through these difficult routes, so weather and road conditions could affect the household. The castle walls offered protection once people arrived, but reaching those walls could itself be a demanding experience. Medieval travel was slow, physical, and closely connected to the condition of the landscape. Guests arriving at a medieval castle could create extra work for everyone inside. Visitors needed food, water, sleeping space, and sometimes care for their horses. Servants prepared rooms, carried luggage, arranged meals, and made sure the household had enough supplies. Important guests might receive better rooms or more comfortable bedding, while ordinary travelers had simpler arrangements. A sudden arrival could place pressure on the kitchen and storage areas, especially if many people came together. Horses needed stables, feed, and water, while carts had to be placed somewhere secure. The castle therefore had to adapt quickly to changes in the number of people living inside its walls. Hosting visitors could be socially important, but it was not effortless. Every guest increased the demand for food, fuel, water, cleaning, and attention. For the people doing the work, hospitality meant additional physical labor. The impressive welcome seen by an important visitor was supported by servants quietly carrying supplies, preparing rooms, lighting fires, and organizing meals behind the scenes. By this point, the castle begins to look very different from the romantic image we often imagine. Its towers were impressive, but the rooms could be cold. Its halls were grand, but they could be crowded and noisy. Its walls offered protection, but they also limited light and fresh air. Almost every convenience required human effort. Water had to be carried, food prepared, fires maintained, clothing repaired, and waste removed. Even sleeping required adapting to cold stone, rough bedding, and household sounds. Wealth could improve some conditions, but it could not completely remove the limitations of medieval technology. A powerful lord might have a larger chamber, better food, finer clothing, and more servants, yet the basic environment remained shaped by the same materials and methods. The castle was built for security, authority, and survival. Comfort came second. For the people who lived there, these conditions were normal rather than shocking. They knew how to work around them, just as modern people accept the limitations of their own time. The real story of castle life is therefore found in these ordinary details. One of the biggest differences between medieval and modern life was the amount of physical effort required for simple tasks. Today, turning on a light, heating water, washing clothes, or preparing a meal can take only minutes. Inside a medieval castle, each of these activities required several steps. Water had to be carried, wood had to be burned, food had to be prepared by hand, and clothing had to be washed without machines. Even moving supplies around the building required walking and lifting. This constant physical activity shaped the lives of castle residents. Servants and workers became strong through repeated labor, but the work could also be exhausting. There was little separation between household maintenance and daily life because people themselves provided the energy needed to keep everything running. The castle was therefore a place where convenience was rare. What modern people consider automatic or effortless often depended on someone's hands, time, and strength. Once we understand this, the uncomfortable side of medieval castle life becomes much easier to imagine. Personal hygiene was another area where medieval castle life differed greatly from modern expectations. People could wash their hands, faces, and bodies, but bathing required more preparation than simply turning on a shower. Water had to be collected, heated when warm water was wanted, and carried to the place where washing took place. Fuel was needed to heat the water, and servants often helped prepare baths for wealthier residents. Ordinary workers had fewer resources and might wash more simply. Clothing also played an important role in cleanliness because linen garments could be changed and washed more easily than heavy outer layers. Castles did have methods for dealing with waste, but sanitation was limited by the technology of the period. Latrines, drains, wells, and water sources had to be managed carefully to reduce problems. Living among many people and animals made cleanliness an ongoing challenge. Modern plumbing has made hygiene quick and private. In a medieval castle, it was a practical task requiring water, fuel, time, labor, and planning. A medieval castle could also feel crowded, especially when the household was large. Nobles, relatives, servants, guards, craftsmen, visitors, and workers might all be present at different times. Some people had private chambers, but many others shared rooms or sleeping spaces. The Great Hall, kitchens, courtyards, and workshops were often busy throughout the day. This meant that personal space was limited. A person might have a designated bed or chamber, yet people could still enter for work, cleaning, messages, or other duties. Noise traveled through stone passages, and privacy was difficult to maintain. Large gatherings could make the castle feel even more crowded. During important events, additional guests might arrive and increase the demand for food, water, bedding, and firewood. The castle had to function as a community, so cooperation was essential. Modern homes are often designed around individual privacy, but medieval castles were built around shared spaces and practical needs. For residents, living close to others was normal. The lack of privacy was simply another part of the social world they knew. The castle's defenses also influenced everyday comfort. Thick walls, strong gates, towers, and narrow openings helped protect residents, but defensive construction could make the interior feel enclosed. Guards needed to watch entrances and important sections of the walls, while doors and gates had to be secured at appropriate times. Battlements were exposed to wind, rain, and cold, yet watchmen still had to remain alert. Stairs leading to towers could be steep and narrow, making repeated climbs tiring. In bad weather, the stone surfaces became wet and slippery. The defensive design was never intended to make life pleasant. Its purpose was to make the castle difficult to enter and easier to protect. Residents accepted the inconvenience because security was valuable. From a modern perspective, it is easy to admire the dramatic towers and battlements without considering what they felt like to use every day. For medieval people, however, those impressive structures were working parts of the castle. Protection came with cold, exposure, climbing, and constant responsibility. The castle gate was one of the most important places in the entire fortress. It controlled who and what entered the settlement, so guards had to remain alert. Carts carrying food or firewood could arrive at the gate, while visitors, merchants, workers, and travelers waited to be admitted. Checking people and supplies required attention and sometimes created delays. The gate area could become crowded, especially during busy periods. Heavy wooden doors and defensive mechanisms were built for security, not speed. Opening and closing them required effort, and at night they might remain firmly secured. Guards working there had to deal with weather as well. Rain, cold wind, or strong sunlight could make long periods of duty uncomfortable. The impressive entrance that visitors see in a castle today was therefore a working checkpoint. It protected the community but also required people to monitor it continuously. Every arrival passed through a system designed around caution and security, reminding everyone that the castle was ultimately a defensive settlement rather than a comfortable palace. As evening approached, the castle's working rhythm gradually changed. The kitchens became quieter after the main meal, servants finished cleaning, and workers returned tools to their proper places. Fires were checked and prepared for the night, while important doors and gates were secured. Candles and lamps provided small areas of light, leaving much of the building in shadow. Residents gathered near warm hearths when possible, talking quietly or completing simple tasks. Guards began or continued their night duties, making sure the castle remained secure. Outside, the courtyard became calmer as animals settled in their stables and most daily movement stopped. Yet the castle never became completely inactive. A large household required people to remain awake for different responsibilities. The night was therefore a gradual transition rather than an instant silence. After a day filled with carrying, cooking, cleaning, repairing, and organizing, residents could finally rest. The castle's stone walls stood quietly around them, protecting the household while also holding in the cold, darkness, and sounds of the night. By late evening, most of the castle had become quiet. The great hall no longer echoed with the movement of servants, and the kitchen fires had been reduced after the final meal. A few candles still burned in important rooms, while the remaining warmth of the hearth slowly faded. Residents prepared for sleep beneath wool blankets and simple bedding. Some chambers were shared, and even private rooms could remain cold and dim. Outside, guards continued their watch along the walls and near the gates. Their work was essential because the castle's security depended on people staying alert through the night. Wind moved across the battlements while the surrounding countryside disappeared into darkness. Inside, small sounds remained: footsteps in a corridor, the closing of a wooden door, or the crackle of a dying fire. For most residents, this was simply the end of another ordinary day. The castle had provided protection, but it had demanded constant work in return. Its walls were strong, yet life inside them was shaped by effort, limited light, cold rooms, and simple necessities. Looking back at the day, the reality of castle life becomes clearer. The stone walls, towers, and grand halls were impressive, but comfort depended on countless ordinary tasks. Someone carried the water, someone gathered the firewood, someone prepared the food, cleaned the floors, repaired clothing, cared for animals, and checked the stores. These jobs repeated day after day, regardless of weather or season. Even wealthy residents depended on the system. Their better rooms and finer belongings could make life easier, but they could not create modern heating, plumbing, lighting, or privacy. The castle remained a product of its time, designed around defense and survival. Its residents learned to adapt to darkness, cold, smoke, noise, and hard physical work. What seems uncomfortable to us was simply familiar to them. This does not mean medieval people were constantly unhappy. They had friendships, celebrations, traditions, meals, stories, and moments of peace. It simply means that comfort looked different. A warm hearth, fresh bread, dry clothing, and a quiet corner could feel remarkably valuable. As the night deepened, the castle settled into a quieter rhythm. The great hall was dark. The kitchens were still, and most residents had gone to their sleeping places. A few fires continued to glow, providing enough warmth to keep the cold from becoming too severe. Guards remained awake, watching the walls and listening to the sounds beyond the gates. Inside the chambers, people rested beneath blankets while the stone around them slowly absorbed the remaining heat. For a modern observer, the room might seem cold, dark, and uncomfortable. For a medieval resident, it was simply home. The castle had protected them through another day, and tomorrow would bring the same familiar cycle of work. Water would be carried again, fires would be lit, food would be prepared, and floors would be cleaned. The strength of the castle depended on this repetition. Its walls could stand for centuries, but daily life continued through small human efforts. Slowly, the final sounds faded, leaving only the quiet atmosphere of the sleeping fortress beneath the night sky. At last, the castle becomes still. The final candles burn low, the great hall rests in darkness, and the remaining warmth of the hearth slowly disappears into the cold stone. Beyond the walls, the night stretches quietly across the medieval countryside. Inside, the residents sleep beneath simple blankets, while a few guards continue their patient watch. For all its towers, gates, and impressive walls, the castle was never truly a place of effortless comfort. It was a home shaped by defense, work, weather, and necessity. Water had to be carried, fires tended, food prepared, clothing repaired, and rooms maintained. Yet people made lives within these difficult surroundings. They shared meals, told stories, worked together, celebrated important days, and found warmth wherever they could. Perhaps that is the most interesting part of the story. The castle did not need to be comfortable by modern standards to feel like home to the people who lived there. Now the last sounds fade away. The stone corridors grow quiet. The courtyard rests beneath the night sky, and the old castle finally settles into peaceful silence. Good night.